Hi, my name is Kenneth Paul, and this is my woodworking shop. It's a genuine pleasure to have you here. I make these videos to share with you the woodworking projects and techniques from here in my shop. Today's video is video part 5 on making an heirloom wooden tool chest. Particularly, today what we're going to do is make this box jointed coopered lid that opens both ways. Believe it or not, this is not complicated. It's not easy, but it's not complicated. Stay tuned at the end of the video. I'll show you an alternative method for making this kind of a curved coopered top. All right. As always, if you enjoy these videos, do me a favor, like, subscribe, comment. All right, let's get right to it. All right, what we have here are the 24 pieces of cherry that will make up the coopered lid for our tool chest. I've also got some extras. I've done my best to line the grain up. These 4 pieces will be the front of the chest, the front of the lid. These 4 pieces will be the back curve of the lid. These will be the left ends and the right ends. When you lay out a project like this, it's always best to try and match the boards that are butting against each other as closely as you can for grain figure and for color. Now, let me show you where we are. This is a full-size layout of the coopered lid. Again, center, open both ways. Now, these boards are all 7/8 of an inch thick, even though the sides of our boxes are 3/4. Now, the reason we have to use 7/8 of an inch instead of 3/4, let me show you. Let me pencil here. There we go. Get some light on the subject. Now, this is 3/4 inches. This represents the back of the chest. This mark is 7/8 of an inch. This marks the width of our coopered top. Now, you can see when I draw a straight line up, comes here. Then when I do my perfect curve, it starts, touches the center, and then comes back away. You can see over here, this line is a 3/4 inch line. This is what would happen if I made it 3/4 of an inch. When I went to draw, when I go to make that perfect curve, I'm going to be off 1/8 of an inch. I can't add 1/8 of an inch. I'd have to slide this board forward 1/8 of an inch, and then the inside joint won't match, and I need it to match for my hinges. So, because from the edge of the 3/4 inch board to the outside of the true section of a circle is 1/8 of an inch, we need to add 1/8 of an inch. That makes our boards for our coopered lid 7/8 of an inch. And again, you can see the curve. You see where the 3/4 line would be and where the 7/8 line being. All I end up having to do is plane away these points to make a true circle later. All right, the first thing we're going to do is finger joint all of these end pieces to the centerpiece. Let me set up for that, and then I'll show you how we turn these square U-shaped sections into a coopered section. All right, let's get to it. All right, where we stand now is I have finished cutting all of the box joints for the 8 sections that will make up the front and back of the coopered lid for the tool chest. These 4 sections will make up the front half of the coopered lid, and these 4 sections, which aren't assembled yet, will make up the back half of the coopered lid. Now that we have created these 3-sided boxes, the next step is going to be to take these 3-sided boxes and turn them into the curved coopered lid. If we take a look at the drawing, the diagram, this is the end view of the coopered lid. The next step is going to be to take the 2 sides of those 3-sided boxes and turn them into wedges. And then to take all the fronts and cut mating angles onto them. But first, before I set up on that, let me give you a quick walkthrough on using the Incra iBox jig for cutting all of the box joints. All right, let me set up for that. All right, this is the Incra iBox jig. I'm not going to get too comprehensive on using this and setting it up, for the simple reason is Incra has a wonderful website that really shows in detail how this works. I'm just going to give you a brief overview. The first thing you do is you mark the top edge of your boxes on all your pieces. In this case, it's a 3-sided box, so we're marking the 3 pieces. Now, on the blade side of these 2 metal fingers, you'll take your first piece, in this case it's the long pieces, you'll take the edge you just marked and place it against those fingers. There's a front guide that goes here. I've removed it so you can see what's going on. Type it on this side. Now, because this is a tall, narrow piece, I like to take a drafting square, double check it for square, then tighten it down. I then take a pencil, make a small mark across the back of that board, so if it ever gets misaligned, I'll see that that line's not matching. So you would now make your first pass, which is going to result in your first finger. At this point, all you do is you step over and put the gap you just created over those 2 fingers. You'll clamp it, level it, and you'll just keep the exact same procedure until you've made all your cuts. Now, for cutting the mating piece, because by starting against those fingers, you start and end with a finger. The mating piece starts and ends with a space. We take the board we just cut, we reverse it so that the marks we made are now facing this way. We go down on top of those 2 fingers again. Now we take our board with our mark and we place them mark to mark. And again, we would clamp in place. I would check the square, which we are, tighten the clamp. Then I'm done using this board as a setup. I'll remove this board. We'd make our first pass. From this point on, we treat this the same way we did the first board. We slide it up against the fingers, clamp it in place, make our first cut that leaves a full hollow, then sit it on top of those 2 fingers, make our cut, and just keep repeating that right down the line. Makes for an effective box joint. It's the easiest way I found. I really like this jig. It's quick and easy. It's repeatable. Once you have it dialed in, this is one of the best ways to make a box joint. The blade I'm using, and yes, I've got the saw unplugged. This is a Freud box joint jig. It makes two different widths. Set up the way it is right now, it makes a 3/8 box joint. If I were to take these blades and reverse them, it would make a 1/4 inch. So you can do 1/4 inch and 3/8 box joints with this blade, and it leaves a perfectly flat gullet. All right, that's just a quick overview on the Incra iBox jig. I'm fond of it. Again, not sponsored or anything, but I find that it's the quickest, easiest way for me to make repeatable box joints. All right, now it's time to set up and create the coopered sections out of the square boxes, the three-sided boxes we made. Let's get to that. All right, where we are now is we're going to take the end pieces for our coopered lid and turn them from squares into wedges. The first thing we do is we make a paper template of the exact size wedge we want. We place the wedge, we place the template on top of the end piece. We then trace the design onto the end piece. Then what I did was I passed a piece of plywood between the fence and my saw blade. So now I know that the edge of this piece of plywood is exactly in line with the edge of my saw blade. But I didn't just pass this piece of plywood. I used a piece of double-sided tape to stick a piece of plexiglass on top of that plywood when I cut it. So now I know that piece of plexiglass and that piece of plywood are exactly in line with the edge of our saw blade. The reason we do that is when I place the end piece to be cut into a wedge on top here, I need this line to line up with the edge of the saw blade so I can cut directly where I want to cut. I take my plexiglass, I put that against the fence and make sure the plywood is against the fence. Now I know the saw blade is going to cut exactly on the edge of this piece of plexiglass. So when I place the plexiglass directly on that line, I know my saw blade is going to cut directly on the line I want to cut. This is a good tip. You can use this for a lot of different things. Once I had this in position, I put a little bit of 5-minute epoxy on the bottom of 2 little pieces of scrap and held them against it to use them as stop blocks. Now the reason I put a couple of drops of 5-minute epoxy, I'm going to screw these from the bottom to hold them in position. But when I go to put the screws in, I want to make sure they don't shift. So in order to make sure that they don't move around while I'm putting those screws in, I put a little dab of quick setting epoxy. That way when I put the screws in, I know we're not going to come out of alignment. That way every time I put a piece against these, I'm going to get the same cut. We have 16 of these to make, and they all have to be absolutely precise. Now, once we make our first pass, we're going to flip the piece over, take the wedge we cut off, put it on this side, and adjust it so that the second cut lines up exactly with the edge of our blade. I'll show you when I set up and start cutting. Also, I haven't done it yet, but I'm setting up. I'm going to drill a hole, put this threaded rod in, and this clamp will hold the board down. I'm going to put a little bit of self-adhesive sandpaper underneath this piece, and I'll have the clamp on top, and I know that this won't shift or move while I'm passing it through the saw. You have to do everything you can to make sure that your cuts are going to be repeatable. Alright, I'll show you when I start cutting. That's it for right now. Alright, what we're doing now is making the first cut of the wedge. Okay, where we are now, we've cut several of the rectangles into wedges on one side. We've cut one on both sides. Now, how we cut you saw how we cut the first side. To cut the next side of the wedge, we take one of the wedges we cut off, place it against our guide, then place the angle we just cut against it. I just had to play with the length of this to get the right line alignment using the piece of plexiglass. Now that I have this set, there'll be the same angle on all of them. So all I have to do is clamp it in place. And now we're ready to make a pass. Let me show you. Let me turn the dust collector on. Alright, we've got all of our wedges cut. I've got 8 of them stacked up, just so I can get an idea of what the profile will look like. Now, the next step, now that we have the wedges for each end cut, now we need to cut the connecting pieces with the same angle as the wedges. Let me show you how that's done. Alright, let's get to it. Now, the next thing for us to do is to transfer the angle from these wedges to the edges of our connecting boards. So, we fit in, come on, there we go. Raise it up a little bit. We take our marking knife, make a fine line, and to be able to see it, we follow up with a 0.5 lead. We do the same thing on the other side. Okay, and that's the angles we're going to set up for and cut on the table saw. Let me show you. Okay, now we're running the angle on these connector pieces. Let me show you how it fits. Alright, let me show you the fit we're looking for. Again, no catch-up at all. We are good. I will be sanding these on a platen later, but right now, that's dead smooth. If I can get them all like this, life is good. And we'll glue them up and proceed from there. Alright, I'll show you the glue up when we get there, but right now I'm going to continue cutting the angles on all of our connector pieces. Alright, let's get to it. What we have here is the clamping jig to hold the sections of the coopered top square while I clamp up the box joints. Let me show you. Those triangles fit right into the wedges. It holds it at just the right height. I can now clamp them together. It'll stay square in the relationship we're looking for, just the right width. I can only clamp one at a time this way, but I'm in no hurry. All right, let me get this glued up and I'll show it to you all clamped in. All right, let's get to it. All right, here we are with the coopered lid section all clamped into place. And you can see how this jig holds everything square. And like I said, because the wedges are being held by these two pieces, I'm able to exert clamping force down while keeping it perfectly centered and level. I left myself a little space here so that I could clear the squeeze out from underneath. Once I have all these singles glued up, I'll make a new jig to glue up doubles. Then once we have 4 doubles, we'll glue the doubles together to make each side of the coopered lid. All right. Well, let's get to it. All right, where we stand now is I have finished gluing up the 8 sections of the coopered lid. Our next step is to take these 8 sections, and what we're going to do is go from 8 single sections. We're going to pair them up, glue them together to create 4 sections of 2, like this. In order to do that, we're going to take our clamping jig that I had set up for a single section of the coopered lid. I've now modified it to be able to hold 2 sections. So we're now going to glue 2 sections together. This one's all clamped up, already glued. And the reason we're doing this, instead of gluing all 4 sections together, you have a lot more control. If I glue 2 together and then another 2 together and glue those together, I'm only ever working with one glue line. I've got a glue joint here. When I glue the next pair together, I'll be dealing with one glue joint I have to match. And then when I take both those pairs and glue them together, again, I'll only be having to worry about aligning one glue joint. Try to keep it as simple as you can. And what we have here, I have 4 sections. Now these sections aren't glued together or anything. These sections are just stacked right now. Just to give a visual idea of what the coopered lid is going to look like. And once we finish gluing everything up, we'll have a section of 4 that's hinged one way, and then a section of 4 that'll be hinged the other way. Naturally, we'll be rounding everything off by planing it and sanding it. All right. Let me set up and show you how I'm fitting these together. One moment. All right, what I'm set up here with is I have a strip of self-adhesive sandpaper, and then I've built up layers of tape to be the same thickness as the sandpaper. Now I'd like to say that when I'm done cutting and gluing up my sections, they're absolutely perfect and they don't need any adjusting. But that's not how life works. This connection has to be perfectly in plane. And if there's a tiny little thickness difference, the easiest way to handle it, find yourself a known flat surface. I'm using my table saw. The tape keeps the wedges in plane with the connector piece. And by sliding this back and forward, I can make the small adjustments I have to make to be sure everything is just as perfectly in plane as I can get it. All right, there's one more technique I want to show you for sanding. One moment. Now, the system I just showed you with the long piece of self-adhesive paper works best when this long piece is connected to the wedge. If this long piece is proud of the wedge, that works really well there. But if the wedge is sticking out a little proud of this connector piece, what would work better is lie the piece down onto a piece of sandpaper. Actually, I'll have to reverse this one moment. This way. And what happens now, if I draw a piece of sandpaper out from underneath, because while I'm drawing this, it's only touching the tip for a second, but it's touching the heel for the entire length of the pull, it's going to take more off the bottom of the wedge. So by pulling this way, I'm going to take more off the bottom than the top, which is what I'm looking to do in this case. Both of these techniques presume that you've done a really good job of cutting and fitting, and you're only dealing with 1/1000th or two to get an exact fit. Anything more than that, you would use your plane and then move on to sanding. But this technique of taking more off from one end to the other by pulling the sheet from under is something I learned from watching a guitar repair person on YouTube. His name is Twoford, Twoford. Well worth watching. I love the way his problem-solving skills for woodworking really translate well. Anyway, I'm going to start gluing these up, and once I've got all the pairs glued up, I'll show you gluing up the pairs into quads, and we'll move on from there. Okay. All right, where we are now, all 4 of our doubles, we have all 8 sections glued into sections of 2. So we have a section of 2, a section of 2. Now that all 8 of our sections are now 4 sections of 2, we need to take these 4 sections of 2 and make 2 sections of 4. And again, the benefit of doing it this way, when I glued this together, I had 1 glue joint. When I glued this one together, I had 1 glue joint. And now over here, when I glue these 2 together, I'm only going to have to worry about 1 glue joint. That means I can glue this together in 10 minutes or less. And because I don't need an extended time, I don't have to use the extended epoxy. I can just use regular wood glue. Now, when I say I can use a regular wood glue, I use Titebond. When I'm using a Titebond and I say I have 10 minutes, I'm referring specifically to Titebond Type 3. Titebond Type 2 only gives you about 5 minutes of open time. So I like to use that on anything that I can glue up in less than 5 minutes. But a case like this where it's going to be a little bit just making sure everything is lined up properly while I'm gluing, I like to give myself that little bit of extra time. So I have a full 10 minutes with the Titebond Type 3. Now we're using the same gluing jig we've used before, just the 3rd version of it. Version number 1 allowed us to glue 1 wedge at 22.5 degrees. The 2nd version allowed us to glue 2 wedges together at 45 degrees. And now the version we have set up right now allows us to put 4 wedges for a total of 90 degrees. I've got one already glued up. Now here's a section totally glued. Joints are all good. And let me show you perfectly 90 degrees. Now we'll glue up the next 4. That'll give us the other half of our lid. And our next step will be to mortise in our hinges. Once we have the hinges installed and the cooper top is locked in place, we'll start planing the coopered edge of the coopered top from facets to a true round. And you can see the small overhang we have here, which we need so that when we're doing the full round, it's going to be thick enough here. Remember, if we went 3/4 inch, when I went to do the round, we'd be off 1/8. We need to start 1/8 further out so that the center of each of these wedges is part of the true circle. All right. Let me get busy on the next glue up. I'll show you it clamped up, and then we'll move on to the hinges. Okay, let's move on. All right, and here we are with the last half glued up. All right, the next step will be the hinges. We'll be using SOSS number 103 hidden hinges. I'll show you how we route those in. All right. And another part done. All right, let's move on to the hinges. All right, where we stand now is the two halves of our croupier top are finished glued up. We've got a nice fit everywhere. Now, before we start shaping this into a true half circle, I need to get my hinges in place. Now, to get my hinges in place, you remember we have a slight overhang right here. We overhang here so that when we go to make the true half circle, we'll have enough space sticking out. But the hinges I'm going to use, SOSS 103 invisible hinges, I need to put my router template against the same reference surface. So I need this edge of the top to be flush with this edge of the sides. Now I could just plane that, but there's an easier way for us to get this edge perpendicular and flush. I'll show you that in just a moment. And you can see the center joint is nice and closed. Let me actually move this and show you it opening. By taking our time, we get a good fit everywhere. All right, let me show you how we're going to trim this flush, and then we'll get on with the hinges. Now, in order to square off this edge parallel with the side of the box, so we have the same reference point for our jig for mortising our hinges, what I've done was I've ripped a piece of plywood and I've left the fence set at that rip, so we know the edge of the blade is going to be right here. I marked the edge of the box over here, put that mark on the edge of the plywood, screwed in a couple of blocks, clamped it to it. Now I know when I pass this, I'm going to end up with a line that's square and even with the face of the box. All right, let me show you. All right, let's rip that edge of the box. Let me show you what that looks like on the box. All right. What we have here now, we have an edge that's flush, actually sticking out like a 64th of an inch, which is like what I want. So we now have an edge that's flush with our case, and that'll give me a reference point for our routing jig for our SOSS 103 invisible hinges. All right, I'll rip the other side, and then I'll show you me routing in the hinges. We'll make templates to show a true round. We'll plane this exactly round, and that'll be pretty much bringing us to the end of chapter 5. All right, let's get to it. Where we're at now is I'm mortising in for the hinges. The hinges are SOSS, S-O-S-S, number 103 hidden hinges, and they require a two-step mortise. Oops, put it in the wrong way. What I like about these hinges is they're strong, but when the lid is closed, you don't see the hinge. I like the idea of the hinge not being visible. It's worth a little bit extra effort to get that effect. Now, in order to get this 2-layer mortise, you can drill a half-inch wide. You could drill half-inch hole, 2 deeper half-inch holes, then clear it out with a chisel. I'm using a SOSS template guide for the router. How this works is there are 2 screws, here and here. When these screws are in place, they set the width of the deeper hole. So first you set your router for the deep hole, route in between these 2 screws. Then you set your route for the shallower of the mortise. You take the 2 screws out, then you route the shallower mortise in place. Alright, let me show you real quick. I'm going to set up on the router. I'm going to show you me routing out this section, and then I'll show you once I have all the hinges routed in, and then we'll start on shaping the top into a full true circle. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, let me show you the first of the holes being routed in. And again, I'm in between the 2 screws right now, so this will be the deeper of the cuts. So I set my router for the deep cut. Alright, now I'll just remove those screws, route the next, and then move on to the rest of the hinges. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, where we are now, I have all the hinges on, and I've got a true half circle paper template on both ends, so I can use that as a guide for planing this top into a true half circle. Now if you remember, we use 7/8 material on this top instead of 3/4, so that if you look closely where this circle comes around, it just barely touches in the middle and the corners stick out. Same thing we go around here. Just barely touches and then the corners protrude. Barely touches, corner protrudes. If we'd have used 3/4 inch stock, it would be touching on these points and we'd be too far in on these flats. So that's why we made it thicker, so that we can do a true half circle without having to drop this down. On this end, I've already taken a block plane. Focus here. And I've knocked some of the corners down a little bit just to get an idea of what the round is going to look like. Now I'm going to be taking my, I'll use a number 5.5. I'll use a number 5.5 plane, and I'll start on these corners. I'll bring them flush straight end to end, working from the end to the middle and from the end to the middle so I don't blow out the grain on the ends. And once I've brought those facets down, we'll work on the next set. So right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 facets. Then we'll have 14 facets. Then we'll have 28, and at that point we'll be ready to sand. Let me show you planing this for a moment, then I'll show you what I'm going to do after planing. Alright, hang on. Alright. using my number 5.5. Again, I don't want to use too short a plane. I want to get a straight edge. If I were to use like a number 4, there's too much of a chance of undulation. So I'll be careful. Now, because we have so many boards laminated up here, we have to be careful because the grain might be going this way on this board and this way on this board. So we've got to feel ourselves out. Take shallow cuts, keep the mouth shut down on your plane. Keep taking down these high points. Now, again, I'll bring these high points down right to these white circles. When I've got that faceted enough, I'll switch over to this. This is just a piece of thin plywood strengthened with a piece of fiberglass. It's got a couple of strips of Velcro to hold paper. And the nice thing about this, it's flexible. I'll be able to sand following this profile. But that's after we've faceted it enough with the plane. It'll be quite a bit of work with the plane. And again, we have to plane from the edge to the center, because if I were to plane out over here, we'd break the grain out for sure. All right, let me get to this. I'll show it to you once we get completed. All right, what we have here are the shavings from smoothing this out. All right. Look how nice the joint is where the invisible hinges are. All the joints, because we glued one joint at a time, all the joints are really tight. I am really pleased with this sunburst effect. I was originally thinking of putting a bonsai tree inlay here. But now I'm going to wait until until I get the drawers in place, because I'm really liking this sunburst effect, and I'm not sure I want to put anything there now. But you can see that curved effect for the box joints. And again, here's the seam line for our hidden hinges. I am really very pleased with how this turned out. Even the seam where they join together. Nice and tight. Let's open her up. One half here, one half here. And that gives us full access to the inside of our tool till. Actually, over here we'll be having 2 cantilevered shelves that come up. That'll be a separate video. All right. Like I say, the fit and finish, because we took our time, really came out well. Now, let me discuss exactly what I had to do to get it this smooth. Let me set the camera up and we'll discuss what I've done. Now, you know I had the paper templates on each end that I passed the plane on. As I was passing the plane, I tried to go from the edge up a little bit to create a high spot in the middle. It's easier for me to correct that. Then I kept using a straight edge to see if I had any rock. That's how I got myself straight. Then I would take a pencil and I would draw every 1 inch. I would draw a series of pencil lines. Then I would use the flexible sander to go over, and that would reveal my low spots. Wherever the pencil was still showing, we knew that that was a low spot and I needed to take off the 2 high spots. I also used a flexible rule to see if there was any gaps under the rule anywhere. A word on the sanding. I just used the sanding to show where my low spots were. I don't generally use much in the way of sanding to smooth something like this. Sanding doesn't tend to cut as well as using a plane or a scraper. I kept using the plane as much as I could. When I couldn't use the plane anymore, I switched over to the cabinet scraper. I did an awful lot of this by the cabinet scraper going diagonally over the high points. The thing with the cabinet scraper is where you've got cathedral type grain, which you try to eliminate on this, just a word on that. I tried to cut my stock to get quarter sawn grain as much as possible, because where there's flat sawn grain, like you see this little bit cathedral here, you've got the soft grain, then you've got the winter grain, which is harder, so you've got summer, winter. If you're sanding, you'll tend to sand more of the soft grain and not the hard, and you get little undulations, whereas a card scraper or a plane cuts. And when you are sanding, use fresh sandpaper. Fresh sandpaper cuts. Dull sandpaper just smooths things over. I suggest 3M's Cubitron. It cuts well. Again, not sponsored, just telling you what I think. But the cabinet scraper is a godsend here. This is what allowed me to take down the high spots without digging more out of the soft grain than the hard grain. And like I say, having all those pencil lines, they allowed me to see where all those low spots were. All right, let's see. I've covered the quarter sawn, I've covered using the straight edge, the pencil lines, using the card scraper, why sanding isn't recommended because of the tiny little knots, the hard grain. Where you hit pieces of hard grain, the sandpaper will tend to smooth both sides of it. All right, now, as I said at the beginning of the video, I'm going to show you an alternate method of building this. If you don't want to do the full 7/8 or 3/4 top with box joints for a weight issue, let me show you another way of doing it. Because, like I say, doing this falls into also what I said at the beginning of the video. There was nothing really complicated about doing this top. It's a series of straightforward processes. However, just because it's not complicated doesn't mean it's easy. I'm telling you, I spent hours scraping and feeling and gauging and checking. Hours of work went into this. It's not easy. It's not complicated, but it's not easy. All right, let me show you an alternate method for creating this coopered top. All right, if you see this wooden kayak that I built hanging from the ceiling in my shop, it's a 17-foot sea kayak, and I have a video on building this from start to finish if you're interested. But you can use the same technique to create a curved top. Now, let's pull this over here. You can see these little coven bead strips. This is done on the router table with a coven bead set. You can see there's a bead on one end and a cove cut into the other. And you can use these to follow a form. So if you made the ends out of plywood, 1/2-inch plywood, made these forms, and then covered the ends with a 1/4-inch, the same kind of a wedge fan detail, it would look virtually the same. And again, you just glue these as you go. It's a nice tight joint. This is much lighter I just wanted to use, I just really liked that curved box joint look. But this is an alternate method if you'd rather use it. Again, straightforward. Nothing is ever easy, but it is not complicated. All right. On our next video, video number chapter 6, we'll be doing our drawers. Now the drawers, I'll be doing some detail work. I'm thinking of doing some inset ellipticals and using rosewood, and again, we'll cover that when we get to it. We'll be doing half-blind dovetails. I'll have 6 drawers to build, 2 different sizes, 4 of one size, 2 of the other. Well, if you found this video informative, or you enjoyed it, or you just want to support me, do me a favor, like, subscribe, comment. And as I said before, particularly comment. YouTube likes it when people comment. All right, I'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.